Right, Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
Back to Shmuel Aleph. I need to just let a few people in. Hang on a sec. There we go. In they come.
Shmuel Bet,
Shmuel
actually.
Bet, I hope.
Sorry?
Shmuel Bet, I hope.
What did I say?
Aleph.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, the truth is, we are going to take, if we get through, which I never get through what I prepared, but if we get through what I've prepared, we're actually going to take a trip pretty much through Shmuel Aleph as well. And of course, we're going to be dealing we're going to be going into Divrei Hayamim, because that's often gives us trouble because it's not consistent. I remember once, just as an aside, I remember once a good number of years ago being some kind of I think it was, I don't know, some kind of a party for something, engagement party or something. And this guy was there who was, I think, just trying to impress me and, show what a learned fellow he was. And he said to me, I was learning Divrei Hayomim last week and such. And I thought to myself, who on earth learns Divrei Hayomim? Right? I mean, it's the last book of Tanakh. Who on earth learns that? It's just a list of names and things that went on. What would you do that for? And I remember thinking that this guy was really just trying to impress, and wasn't really very truthful about it. But actually, having now learned some Tanakh properly, I can see how valuable Divrei Hayamim is. I'm not so sure it's the kind of thing you sit and go through bit by bit, but certainly what we're doing here is looking at the description of stories in Shmuel and comparing it to the description of the same stories in Divrei Hayamim, and it's really very interesting. And there are significant contradictions which need to be explained, as we'll see today if we actually get there. So let's go to Shmuel Bet Chapter 5, which is where we're up to. Let me share the screen with you straight away. Okay, I'm hoping that is Shmuel. Is that Shmuel Bet Chapter 5? Yes, good. Okay, now let's just have a very, very quick recap of last week. What we said last week was that this chapter was not in chronological order, because it tells us in verse 13 all about David's concubines and his wives, and these were born to David in Jerusalem, and all these people here, and all these sons of his, verses 14 to 16 that you can see on the screen. And of course, these were not born immediately after he was anointed, or even immediately after he conquered Jerusalem. So the concept, if you like, the not concept, what am I looking at, the word I'm looking for, the overall goal of this chapter 5 is to show us the consolidation of David's kingdom. It's not to be taken in chronological order, because it clearly isn't. Because as we pointed out last week, if we look at verse 3, Jeffrey, verse 3, please, for us.
All the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David sealed a covenant with them in Hebron before Hashem, and they anointed David as king over Israel.
And now jump to verse 17.
The Philistines heard that all the tribes had anointed David as king over Israel. So all the Philistines came up to seek out David. David heard and went down to the fortress.
Stop there. So it's clear, if you read 3 and 17 consecutively, that follows on, one follows on from the other. Number 3 says all the elders came and anointed him, and 17 says and the Philistines heard that they anointed David, and then they went to attack. So in other words, verses 5 through to 16, which is the overall, 5 is the overall reign of David, 7 years and 6 months in Jerusalem and 33 years 7 years and 6 months in Hebron, 33 years in Jerusalem. That's a summary. And then it is the conquest of Jerusalem. And then is the building of the palace, which we spoke about, Hiram. And then are all these children are born. All of that stuff, in other words, verse 4 to 16, is just there, not because it happened chronologically at this point, but to tell us about how David consolidated his kingdom. He consolidated his kingdom by A, conquering Jerusalem, B, building himself a palace with the help of King Hiram's cedar wood and workers, and C, having lots of children and concubines, or the other way around, concubines and children, right? So all of these things, including, this is important, including the conquest of Jerusalem, is in the wrong place chronologically. It's not there to tell us chronological order here. It's there to tell us that David's kingdom was strong. But before it got strong, we've got verse 17, which is the Philistines heard they've anointed David. This is before he's consolidated his kingdom, before he's conquered Jerusalem. I'm going to show you why it's before he conquered Jerusalem in a moment, and before he's got all his wives and his kids. And what did they want to do? And this makes sense, doesn't it? When is a new king at his most vulnerable?
At the beginning.
At the beginning, correct. Before he has an opportunity to consolidate his kingdom, to get a nice fancy fortress and a capital city and thick walls around it and all that stuff. So this is why verse 17 says, and the Philistines heard that they anointed David as king over Israel, and I'm going to add in a word here, and then immediately all the Philistines went up to seek David. As soon as they heard that David had been anointed, they wanted to attack, because that was when he was at his most vulnerable. And David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now then, Vayered el ha-Metsudah. Metsudah, what does that word sound like?
Metsudah.
Yes, Hannah, you're muted, but I could read your lips. Hannah said Masada, Metzadah in Hebrew. And what is Masada?
Fortress.
A fortress. That's right. It's a fortress.
But so was Jerusalem.
Ah, very good point, Jeffrey. Let's just have a look at verse 9, please.
It actually tells us. It tells us this.
Read verse 9 for us, Jeffrey.
David feared Hashem on that day, and he said, "How can the ark of Hashem?"
Wait. Where are you? Where are you? I'm on verse 9. Where are you?
Oh, I've turned the page. I'm sorry, I was the wrong page. Sorry. David settled in the fortress and called it the city of David. David built around the city from the Millo and inward.
Stop there. David dwelt in the stronghold. Now, this is after the capture of Jerusalem. Now, in verse 17, David goes down to the stronghold. Now, if David goes down to the stronghold, it can't be the city of David, can it? Because he was already there. He would have already been there. So this is another proof. This where it says, Vayered el ha-Metsudah, he went down to the stronghold, means that this is a different stronghold. This is not the stronghold of verse 9, which is the city of David, because that hasn't been captured yet. Because all of what we just said before was out of chronological order. That's why I preceded what we learned today in verse 17 by telling you that verses 4 to 16 were out of order, including the capture of Jerusalem and making Ir David a Mitzudah, a fortress, because David goes down to a different fortress. Now, where might that fortress be? Well, we need to have a look at the battle. Verse 18, Jeffrey.
The Philistines had come and spread out in the Rephaim Valley.
Stop there. Stop there. The Rephaim Valley, the valley of Rephaim. I'm going to read it in Hebrew. Uplishtim ba'u, and the Plishtim came, vayinatshu, and they spread out. But Emek Rephaim, where's that?
Jerusalem.
Emek Rephaim is a street in Jerusalem. It's a street near the German colony. I'm sure you've all been there because there's lots of fancy restaurants there and some not so fancy ones too. It's a very popular area. We've all been there. We've all walked down Emek Rephaim. Some of us have got friends and relatives who live in that area. Is that what we're talking about? The Philistines came and spread out in a suburb of Jerusalem.
That's somewhere north of Jerusalem.
What do you think? Obviously, the answer is no, or I wouldn't be asking you the question. It's not north of Jerusalem, Michael, actually. The Emek Rephaim that we're referring to, the valley of Rephaim, is over here. Let me see if I can find it for you. I've got it ready. Where is it? There it is. Can you see that? Okay, so here, forget that blob for a moment. You can read what it says below the blob. Can you see that? Valley of Rephaim, it says. Now, the Valley of Rephaim is over here. It's actually all of this area here that I'm circling. And many of the areas, many of the Mefarshim here, have a look at what Josephus says. It's located by Josephus between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. There's Yerushalayim, there's Beit Lechem. So all of this area is Emek Rephaim. So it's not, on this picture, it's north of Jerusalem, like Michael said. But actually, what they're referring to now is the area southwest of Jerusalem, over here, where it says the Bet of Bet HaKerem there, between Yerushalayim and Beit Lechem. This is the area of the Valley of Rephaim. So why is the street in Jerusalem called Emek Rephaim? Well, why not? We've got streets in Jerusalem called Rashi and Rambam and all sorts of things. You're not going to tell me that Rashi's buried there because he isn't, or lived there because he didn't. It's just a name. So Emek Rephaim of Shmuel is over here in this area here. Now, there is an interesting site. This is a website that I've never come across before. It's a website of called Emek Shaveh. What does Shaveh mean?
Equal.
Equal, yeah. This is an NGO. This is the website of an NGO. Here it is. It tells you what it is. Emek Shaveh is an Israeli NGO working to prevent the politicization of archaeology in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So this NGO is trying to be equal to the Israelis and the Palestinians in terms of archaeology. But it's an interesting thing. I came across it because I wanted to know about... Well, hang on a minute. Hang on. Well, I'll wait a minute. So I came across it because I wanted to know a little bit about Emek Rephaim. What's really interesting is that over here, it says there are no sites in the area that could be identified with historical or biblical sources, nor with other ancient traditions, except for Khirbet al-Yahud. Khirbet al-Yahud. Anybody know any Arabic?
Yahud
is Jews.
Yeah.
Yahud is Jews. What about Khirbet?
Philbet.
Khirbet is ruins.
Wow.
Okay. You'll find lots of places called Khirbet this and Khirbet that. Khirbet al-Yahud is the ruins of the Jews.
Oh, that's from
And
that's from the Hebrew chulva. Philbet.
correct. Same word,
Churban.
Churban, yes. The Churban is a destruction. Yes, correct.
Chulban.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same root. Well, Arabic and Hebrew are very closely related, of course. So Khirbet is Arabic for ruin or destruction. So Khirbet al-Yahud is the remains or the remnants or the destruction place or a previous place of the Jews. Now look what it says here. The better known Khirbet al-Yahud located in the village of Batir. Batir, what does that sound like? Yes, it does. Has often been identified with the historical Beitar, a settlement during the Bar Kokhba revolt, where the Jewish rebels suffered a crushing defeat by the Romans. So this is the area that we're talking about. So if we go back to that little map here, by the way, this map is from a Christian website. I don't know what it's called, but it's got a big cross on it, as you can see over there. Oh, Bible Hub it's called, but it's quite useful because it comes out with some interesting maps. So over here is the area also of Beitar, where there was the terrible massacre during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And basically that was the end of the Bar Kokhba rebellion with the defeat of Beitar. Now I got another map ready. Oh, that's later on. Okay. So that is Rephaim. What's this one I got ready? Here.
I was gonna ask a question.
One sec. I just want to finish the map business and then I'll come to you. Over here in this map, you can see where we're talking about. Let me just go in a little bit. There's Jerusalem. Okay. There's Katamon. And look where Batir is. You see Batir over here?
Mm.
So the Emek Rephaim area where all this took place is said to be around Al-Warajah, which is right next to Batir. If I just scoop out a bit, look where Beitar is, modern day Beitar. There's Beitar Ilit, okay, over here, very, very close. So this is the area of biblical Emek Rephaim that we are talking about now. So Michael, you can see, whereas in the map that I showed you, it did appear to be north of Jerusalem. Actually, what we're talking about is southwest of Jerusalem over here, this area here. Right, Hannah, all yours.
I was just going to ask, this site that says Emek Shaveh, how can there be Palestinian ruins here when they didn't exist in the past?
Don't know. I suspect. Well, let's have a look over here. I just read the first paragraph. The ancient agricultural terraces of the Rephaim Valley, some of them still in use, bear witness to thousands of years of human activity centered around water springs which dot its slopes. A wealth of archaeological remains can be found in Palestinian villages of Al-Walajah and Batir. I think when it's using the term Palestinian, I think it's not using it in the modern word that we would consider the Palestinian, but it means sort of indigenous to the area, Canaanite or whatever it was back in the day. Because here we're talking about 17th and 18th century BCE. Which go, well, if you think David HaMelech was the 10th century BCE, 11th and 10th century BCE, we're talking 600 years earlier. So I guess they're using the word Palestinian, not in the modern terminology.
No, but I find it ironic that by the site is actually doing what they say they aim not to be doing, which is politicizing the archaeology, because by saying it's Palestinian is politicizing it. Yeah, they didn't exist. They weren't around. It wasn't Palestine until the Romans conquered Israel.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
even
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. It makes sense what you're saying. I don't know. It's not my website, but yeah, I think that's a fair point, Hannah. I think that is a fair point. Whenever you have these things that say, shaveh, that they're trying to be equal, they're not really trying to be equal, are they? We all know
no,
that.
they're trying to shaft us.
Yeah, we know that. That's true. And I think this is a good example. Well pointed out. Well pointed out. Let's steer away from it, though. You're right, but let's
Okay,
steer.
no, it
No,
was
no,
just
you're right.
it
You're
doesn't
right.
it doesn't mean that their maps are no good. I'm
No,
not
no, no,
saying that.
no. You're right. You're right. But let's steer away from it. Let's stick to Shmuel. You're quite right, though. It's a very fair point. So let's go back to our story.
Jewish.
We are now verse 18 again for me, Jeffrey, please.
The Philistines had come and spread out in the Rephaim valley.
Right. So we know where it is now. Carry on.
David inquired of Hashem, saying, "Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand?" And Hashem answered David, "Go up, for I shall indeed deliver the Philistines into your hand."
Okay, stop there. What does that tell you about David?
Well, he was in very close contact with Hashem.
Yeah. He asked Hashem.
Speaking terms with him, it's almost unique.
Yeah, okay. And so basically he inquired of Hashem. Now, how do you do that? Hashem doesn't have WhatsApp. So how does he get in touch with him? Urim v'tumim, correct. Yeah. The Kohen Gadol wears his ephod with the choshen on it. Yeah. He wears his ephod, the apron with the choshen, the breastplate on it. And on the breastplate are all those stones, right? And they are called the Urim v'tumim. And that was how you inquired of the Lord. You went to the Kohen Gadol and you inquired of the Lord through the Kohen Gadol in the Urim v'tumim on the ephod. Now, as Jeffrey quite rightly says, this shows that David took the opportunity right at the beginning, before he went out to battle, to inquire of Hashem whether this was the right thing to do. What does that not remind you of?
Shaul.
Yes, Shaul. Correct. That does not remind you of Shaul, or it reminds you not of Shaul, because what did Shaul do, Hannah?
He decided by himself what he's going to do, and he didn't necessarily listen to what Hashem wanted.
Okay, we are in Shmuel Aleph. I told you we'd get to Shmuel Aleph. We're in Shmuel Aleph, chapter 14. It's on the screen for you, Jeffrey. In blue, please.
And Shaul said to Ahiah, "Bring near the ark of God," for the ark of God was on that day with the children of Israel. And it was, while Saul still spoke to the priests, that the tumult which was in the camp of the Philistines was continuously increasing. And Shaul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." And Shaul and all the people who were with him gathered and came to the battle. And behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, because there was a very great confusion.
Okay, so what does Shaul do? He starts the process of asking Hashem. He brings the ark of Hashem near. He tells Ahiah, who is the priest, to bring the ark of God. But then there's a bit of a commotion goes on. And what does he say to the priest? Withdraw your hand. It means, oh, never mind. I'm not interested in all of that. And then he attacks, and then he goes on into the battle. In other words, he doesn't actually wait for the answer. He doesn't, in fact, inquire of Hashem. And so that is a negative feature of Shaul. And if we go back to ours, David inquires of the Lord, and the Lord answers him, and he says, "Yes, go up." And so this is the reason that the Tanakh is telling us this here We've already, I mean, we're now in chapter 5 of Shmuel Bet. So we know already, the reader knows the way we've done this Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet in such a way that we know what the author of Shmuel thinks about King Shaul, don't we? What's his overall impression of King Shaul?
Not up to the job.
Not up to the job. Yeah, not up to the job. I was expecting Michael Krause to give us a thumbs down. That's what he normally does on that.
I was going to say negative.
Negative, yes, absolutely. No good. Shmuel, the author of Shmuel, does not think much of Shaul overall. But what does he think of David? Well, he's telling us here in contrast to Shaul, and that is why he's stressing this. David inquired of the Lord, brackets, not like that rascal Shaul who didn't, right, close brackets. And he says, shall I go up to the Philistines? And Hashem says, yes. And verse 20, Jeffrey.
David came to the plain of Perazim, and David struck them there. He said, Hashem breached my enemies as water breaches a barrier. Therefore, he named that place the plain of Perazim, breaches.
Okay, fine. So, what's the first thing that he does, David, when he finished smiting them?
He burnt their idol.
Oh, wait. Okay, that's the next verse. What the first thing he did? Verse 20. What did he do in verse 20?
Well, he named the place breaches.
And before that, what does he do?
He struck the Philistines.
And in between striking the Philistines and calling it Baal perutsim, what did he do?
Praises God.
He praises God. The Lord has broken mine enemies before me. So the first thing he does after victory is to say, Baruch Hashem. Yeah. Thank you very much, God. He recognizes the hand of God. And so again, you can see that the author of Shmuel is praising David. He's giving David all the positive, painting him in a very positive light. First of all, he asked Hashem's advice and permission to go into battle. And then after the battle, first thing he does, praises Hashem, and he calls the place something to do with Hashem, Baal perutsim. What is Baal mean?
Master.
The master. Who is the master of perutsim? Perutsim means to breach. Who is the master of breaches?
Hashem.
Hashem. He calls the name of the place a name which is praising Hashem. Who else did that? Who else had an encounter somewhere?
Yaakov.
Yaakov, he had an encounter and he woke up in the morning and he said, whoa, I never realized that this was such a holy place. And what did he call it?
Better.
Bet El, meaning?
House of God. Yeah.
A house of God. So here, the Tanakh is, if you like, comparing David very favorably with Shaul and comparing him to Yaakov Avinu in the way that he called the name Baal perutsim. Now then, yes.
John, could there be some more significance to Peretz? David calling the name Peretz.
Oh, I never thought of that. Go on, tell us why. Yes, I've never thought of that, but go on, tell us.
His ancestor.
Yes. Who was the ancestor of David from the tribe of Yehuda? Was Peretz. Who was Peretz? Who was Peretz?
Ruth's son?
No.
Was it the father of Boaz?
Yehuda's son.
Whose son? Yes, Yehuda's son. And what kind of a son? What kind of a son was he?
Oh, he died. He died leaving a widow.
No.
No.
No, that was his brother. What kind of a son was Peretz?
Youngest son.
No, actually, he was not. He was not the youngest son. By a few minutes. I've just given you a clue.
Oh,
twin.
the twin.
Tamar.
He was a twin. Yes, Peretz was a twin son of
Tamar.
Yehuda and Tamar. But remember the story of Tamar? Tamar was the widow of the two older sons of Yehuda. What were their names? I'll give you a clue. The first one was The second one,
Onan.
Onan, correct. And Onan. And the third son, who was the third son? The third son was not Peretz. No, the third son was somebody who was meant to have been given to Tamar, and Yehuda didn't do it. Anybody remember his name? David will tell us. Shelah, correct. Shelah. Shelah was meant to be given to Tamar because what happens is, what's that called?
Levirate marriage.
Levirate marriage. Yibum, correct. So what happens is dies. Yibum is done with Onan. He dies. And then Shelah was meant to be given to Tamar, but he was only a little boy. So Yehuda sends Tamar off back to her father's house to wait till Shelah grows up. Shelah grows up and he does not give Shelah to Tamar. So Tamar takes matters into her own hands, dresses up as a prostitute. Yehuda, as it were, falls by the wayside and impregnates Tamar. And Peretz was one of the twins who was born as a result of that relationship between Yehuda and Tamar. Anyone remember Peretz's twin brother's name? Give you a clue. Something to do with the son. Good try, but no. What does the sun do, Peter?
Shines.
It shines, yes. His name was Zerach. Which means to shine. Anyway, Peretz was I'm not sure how many greats without thinking very carefully and looking it up in Rut, but was the great-great-great-grandfather of Boaz. Have I got that right, David? The number of greats? I don't know. I'll have to look it up. Anyway, he was an ancestor of Boaz and therefore was also an ancestor of David HaMelech. So Baal perutsim, very nice, David. I hadn't thought of that, but that's great. So he's called that and maybe an allusion.
Random.
What'd you say, Paul?
That's a bit random to go back that number of generations to say, oh, call it that. You know, it's he wasn't a very distinguished relative. You know, he wasn't.
Oh, don't know that he wasn't distinguished, do we?
It's illegitimate.
It wasn't his fault. Anyway, maybe there is some connection there with Baal perutsim. David, was that your own, or did you read that somewhere in a Meforshim who can tell us a bit more?
I haven't actually, no.
So that's a chidush. Where's my little chidushei poleg piece of paper?
I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that it is a chidush. Someone may have said that. I haven't seen it.
It's a chidush to us, and so it's going in. Somebody can challenge it if they want. Just give me a sec to write this down. David Marks, Shmuel Bet Chapter 5, verse 20, Baal perutsim, ? Named after Peretz. Okay, there you go. You're in Chidushei Polig, if it ever gets published, who knows. Right, let's carry on. Lovely. Okay, now then, we've got a difficulty here, a difficulty coming up. What have we just done? We've just done verse 20, haven't we? Yes. Now 21, please, Jeffrey.
The Philistines had left their idols there and David and his men burned them.
Ooh, that's an interesting translation. Say that again.
The Philistines is in brackets.
Oh, thank you.
So it says the Philistines in brackets had left their idols there, and David and his men burned them.
Okay, now let's see what it really says, shall we? That's an art scroll Perush. I'm just having a look. I'm just having a look at what the Koran says. The Koran says, by the way, interesting translation in the Koran I've just seen here of Baal perutsim, of Peretz, we said was a breach. I like the Koran translation here. He says, Vayoma paratz Hashem et oivai. Hashem has blasted my enemies away. That's a nice translation, isn't it? Blasted them away. Anyway, verse 21 has got at least a half more accurate translation than the art scroll, because what it says is Vayazvu sham et atzabehem. They abandoned their idols there. Vayisaim David v'anashav, and David and his men carried them off. Okay, they abandoned them there, and the art scroll has added in that this was the Plishtim, and David and his men carried them off.
So, Johnny, on the Shines Arts, he says in light type, which means not the meaning, he says the Philistines fled, and it carries on in the bold type. They left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. And again, in light type, it says, alternatively, this means they burned the images.
Okay, right. So that's where, why does he say that? Alternatively, then let's look at the Hebrew. I think you said, didn't you mention something about burning as well, Jeffrey?
Yeah, well, that's what it says here.
Go on, what does it say? Give me yours again, Jeff.
It says, in brackets, the Philistines had left their idols there, and David and his men burned them.
Okay, now I've got on the screen, and they forsook their images, and David and his men burned them. Well, let's have a look at the Hebrew. Vayazvu sham et atzabehem, and they left there their atzabehem. How would you translate that word? Very good, Jeffrey. Excellent. Atzabehem kesef v'zahav. What does that mean?
Don't know.
Idols.
Idols.
It's in Hallel. That's right. It means they're idols. It means bones, actually. But it means, when it says atzabehem, it means the idols which were made out of bone. They were made out of bone. Or the ones in Hallel, what were they made out of?
Silver and gold.
Yeah, Jeffrey just sang it for us. Atzabehem kesef v'zahav. Right, that's what you're singing, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, you need to know what you're singing. Right? Their idols were made out of gold and silver. So atzabehem is their idols. They left their idols there. Vayazvu, they abandoned them. Vayisaim David. Now then, as what does that mean? Vayisaim.
He carried them.
They carried them. They carried them. We've had that many times. Lasset is to carry. What's the modern Hebrew word for a truck?
Masa'it.
Masa'it. Why is it called a masa'it, Barbara?
Because it carries things from one place to another.
Yes, because it carries things. Isn't Hebrew a wonderful language?
Indeed.
A truck or a lorry, if you're English. Do we call it a truck in English? We call it a lorry, don't we?
We do.
Yeah. Americans call it a truck, I think. Anyway, either way, Israelis call it a masa'it because it carries things away. It doesn't burn things, does it? It's not an incinerator. So why is Art Scroll and Chabad, and at least give Steins out some credit, he puts it in light type, why are they all going on about burning? Anybody want to guess why they're going on about burning idols? Okay, well, let's go back a step. You are a invading army. You are David, and you're battling the Philistines, and you win the war, and you come across their idols. What are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with their idols?
We'll destroy them.
Destroy them.
You're going to destroy them, right? Why are you going to destroy them?
Because they shouldn't be there.
Why?
We shouldn't be influenced by them.
Correct. And where? How do you know that?
Because we've done it before.
Abraham and Terach and all that.
Yeah, Avram and Terach, that's a midrash. Yeah, okay. And where do you know about it from the Torah itself?
God told us not to.
Yes, God told us exactly that. When you go into the land of Canaan, what have you got to do? Burn their idols, break down their matzevot, break down their, what do they call matzevot? Monuments, right? Shatter their mizbeachs, their altars. You've got to break all this stuff down. It's a positive mitzvah in the Torah, right? Get rid of all this stuff. So that's what you would do, but that's not what it says. It says he carried them away. He lifted them up. What does it mean to lift up in biblical Hebrew?
Elevate.
Elevate? Yes. Where do we have a word, a name of a sedra, in fact, which indicates the elevation using that word? A sedra that uses that word. Naso. Yes. What does it say in the beginning of that sedra, Barbara?
Oh, come on. I know it's the longest sedra, but how it begins, I don't know.
It begins with a census, Naso, to elevate the names, elevate the people by counting them and giving them a number. So the concept of Vayisa'im would be to elevate them. It's a big question against David with this word Vayisa'im, right? What's he doing? Vayisa'iming their idols. He's meant to be destroying them. And so therefore, Art Scroll, 1 second, Ivor, and therefore Art Scroll has to find an explanation for this. And so does Chabad, and so does Rav Steinsaltz. Where do you think they might have looked for an explanation as to what this means? Because it can't mean what we think it means. It can't mean that David elevated the idols of the Plishtim. So where do you think? Say again, Michael.
Fire offering.
A fire offering.
Okay, to elevate.
So in other words, he destroyed them as an offering to Hashem, as it were.
Well, not necessarily offering to Hashem, but if a fire offering is elevation, the two are tied together. So they thought, okay, we'll call it a fire. We'll say they burnt it because that's a similar situation. Okay,
maybe, but I think there's a more, you won't know it, but there's a more direct reference to it. Where might we look? I've alluded to it already this morning.
Divrei Hayamim.
Divrei Hayamim. Let's have a look and see what Divrei Hayamim says about this. There we go. It's in chapter is it in? It's in chapter 14 of Divrei Hayamim, and it is in on the screen for you there in blue. And Jeffrey's going to read it for us.
And they went up to Baal Perazim, and David smote them there. And David said, God has broken my enemies in my hand like a breach of waters. Therefore, they named that place Baal Perazim. And they abandoned their deities there, and David commanded, and they were burnt with fire.
Okay, thank you very much. Divrei Hayamim says, Vayazvu sham et Eloheihem, changes the word from Atzabeihem to Eloheihem, which is fine. They both mean their idols. They abandoned their idols. Vayomer David, and David said what? Well, he said to command them. Vayisarfu, ba'esh. Now, what did we have?
V'yisa'u.
Vayisa'im David. And actually, Divrei Hayamim says, Vayisrafu ba'esh. So, Divrei Hayamim gives the opportunity for the translators of Shmuel Aleph to go to Divrei Hayamim and say, oh, it didn't mean Vayisa'im and he elevated them. That can't possibly be right. It must be, and that's why Divrei Hayamim, and I can rely on Divrei Hayamim. I've not made it up, everyone. This is not me doing an art scroll whitewash. This is all there in Divrei Hayamim. All you have to do is to know Divrei Hayamim. And if you know Divrei Hayamim, you know that actually what happened, according to Divrei Hayamim, was they burnt them. So that is why the translation here, and his men burned them, is not a translation. Michael Krauss, you have, if I'm not mistaken, the Living Nach, don't you?
Yeah, but it's in the UK, I'm afraid.
Oh, it's in the UK. Okay, be interesting to know what the Living Nach would have said.
I'll
But
tell
I
you
bet
next week.
We've
I
got
bet
them.
you got the Living Nach. Go and have a
When I
look
get
for us,
it.
Barbara. So this is why the translations here are as they are. Now, what's interesting? Now, I'm upset a little bit with the one on the screen because there's no brackets and there's no light type. I'm not upset at all with Art Scroll because it's got it in brackets, and I'm not upset with Steinsaltz because it got it in light type, which means that it's not the simple pshat. When you
he actually says they carried them away.
Yeah, so that's great. But when you have what we've got on the screen, and you've got a simple bloke like me comes along and says, Vayisa'im David v'anashav, and David and his men burned them, and I don't know any better, that's not right. That's incorporating drush into pshat, and it's not right. What's right is the way that Art Scroll has done it with brackets, and the way that Rav Steinsaltz has done it with the correct translation and then the interpretation. I'm expecting the Living Nach to say burned as well, because the Living Nach does not pretend.
Wrong.
Wrong? Okay, what does the Living Nach say?
Well, the actual translation says, and David and his men carried them off. And then there's a footnote which says, David and his men carried them off and burned them. Chronicles 1:14-12.
There we go. There we go.
Following
So
the law set down in Deuteronomy 7:25.
okay, so there we go. The Living Nach.
Bonnie.
One second, David. The Living Nach has obviously been listening to our shiur, because he quotes Divrei Hayamim, and he also quotes the psukim in Devarim, which we just talked about, which is to break down all idols, etc. Yes, David.
Okay, so that Mikra provides an answer to your problem. He quotes the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim that you've just read, and this is Rashi's interpretation, as you know. Mikan sheperesh vayisa'ei milashon maseit. So it's nothing to do with carrying. It's from the word maseit, which refers to Serefa. And where do you find this? In Judges Shoftim, chapter 20, verse 40.
Okay, let's look at that. Shoftim, chapter 20, verse 40. V'hamash'et heichala la'alot min ha'ir. And the pillar began to rise from the city, Amud Ashan, a column of smoke, Vayifen Binyamin acharav v'inei ala chlil ha'ir ha'shamayma. Benjaminites turned behind themselves, and behold, there arose the smoke of the entire city towards the heaven. Hamasa'et heichala. That's an interesting thing.
And the Targum translates maseit as Serefa, and Rashi, who is 1,000 years after the Targum, follows the translation of the Targum.
Let's have a look at the Rashi. Rashi doesn't say anything on that particular bit, Must be elsewhere. It must be in our place, in our thing, is it? So let's have a look in Shmuel Aleph. Let's look at the Rashi on Shmuel Aleph. Vayisa'im David, Targum, Va'okidun David Vegavruhe. And David and his men burned them. This follows Jonathan. Which Jonathan are we talking about here?
Targum Jonathan.
Yes, Targum Jonathan, not Jonathan as in David's pal. Okay, very interesting that. Okay.
Before that, Johnny,
And
what
he
David
can,
mentioned now about that, which I'm also looking at, just before what you said, David.
Ivor, I can't hear you very clearly. Start again.
Dark Mikra, you hear?
Yes, just. It's a
So
bit
just
muffled.
before that, about the connection between Vayisa'im and fire, that in fact he did lift them up in a victory parade and then burned them because it didn't have any benefit. They may have been indeed made of silver or gold, not just old bone. So it says
that's the other
victory
pshat.
parade.
That's the other pshat of Vayisa'im, of him lifting them up. Why would he lift? And if you look, one of the translations had it, he carried them away, right? Same word as masa'it, right? Carry away. And why would he carry them away? Because he would parade them in front of his people and saying, look, we've captured the gods of the Philistines. The gods of the Philistines are rubbish. And look what we're going to do with them. I'll show you how rubbish they are. I'm going to burn them. And so, yeah, that's the other pshat of Vayisa'im, which makes sense. But the pshat of Dat Mikra of Srefa, I did not know from Shoftim. Very good. Should have known that because we've learnt Shoftim. But there you go. Well done, everybody, for that. Okay, let's just remove the Rashi from here because it actually makes it more difficult to read. Okay, so that.
Ronnie, can I just conclude the comment of Dat Mikra?
Yes, please do.
That by fulfilling the commandments in the Torah, Psilei Elohehem Tisrafum Ba'esh, David is dealing with the Plishtim Midah Keneged Midah, that just as they had burnt Shiloh, we come to take revenge by burning their idols.
Okay, fine. That's fine, and it works very nicely. I'm going to add to that. Why would, let's go to the second pshat. Why would David take the idols and carry them away and then later on burn them in the wherever he took them back to his stronghold? Why didn't he burn them on site? And Ivor told us it was a victory parade, right? But it's more than that, Ivor. It's more than a victory parade. If we go to Shmuel Aleph, I told you we'd be going there all over the place. Chapter 5 on the screen, Jeffrey, please, in blue for you.
And the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon, and set it up beside Dagon.
Okay, now who was Dagon?
He was a god.
He was the Philistine god, that's right. And the Philistines took our Aron Kodesh, our holy ark, and took it away. It carried it away and took it to their temple, the temple of Dagon. And so, as David has said, Midah Keneged Midah, with the burning of Shiloh, they burnt their idols. If you take the second pshat, that they carried them away, he will have brought them to his stronghold and placed them in the same way, Midah Keneged Midah, that the Philistines themselves brought the ark of Hashem and brought it to Dagon. So it completes the circle either way. Whether you take the simple pshat, Vayisa'im, they carried them away, and you understand that to be a victory parade, whether he burnt them or not is another matter, according to that pshat. Either way, he carried them away, victory parade, Midah Keneged Midah, what they did to the Aron HaKodesh. And then if you take the second pshat, which is supported by our pasuk in Shoftim, and certainly supported by Divrei Hayamim, then they took them away for a victory, and then they burnt them, which is another midah keneged midah. So it's a very, very nice closing of the circle here, all in one little word, vayisaim.
Is it possible that the author of Shmuel Bet is being very, very clever with his language and using a verb to express two combined meanings?
It seems that way to me after your intervention with the word in Shoftim. It hadn't occurred to me. I just assumed that the author, the translators, had invoked Divrei Hayamim, which I'm sure is the case. But you're right; it's brilliant, isn't it? And maybe the author of Divrei Hayamim, David, put Vayisrafu for that very reason. Yeah, very, very good. Excellent. Right, now, it's a good place to stop there. And I'll just recap what we've done today. What we did today was show that all of verses 4 to 16 were out of order, and were only there to show us the consolidation of David's kingdom. But before that, the Philistines attacked. We saw that David was a good boy and sought Hashem's counsel before he went out to battle. When he did win the battle, he praised Hashem straight away, and he called the name something which was a praise of Hashem. There may well have been an invocation of his ancestor Peretz in the name. And then we have this very interesting discussion about the verb vayisaim. What does it mean? Does it mean he carried them off? Did it mean he burnt them? Does it mean both? And the answer is probably all of the above. Brilliant. What we will start with next week, oh no, maybe not next week. I'm meant to be traveling next Sunday afternoon. I'll let you know in the morning whether I can do the shiur. Depends how organized I am, what time I have to leave, and if the flights are going after today's performance. But we'll see. Anyway, next time we will start in verse 22, which is the second battle against the Philistines in Emek Raphaim, and we will see the differences between the first and the second battle. If you don't want to have a spoiler, then don't read on. Any questions on today's shiur? Yes, Jeffrey.
We hear about King David's wives, additional wives, but we don't know their origins. Doesn't say who they were the daughter of. So are we to assume that many of these extra children were born from not members of the tribe?
Okay. So the motherhood of David's children is a very difficult point. And we didn't get to it today, and I wanted to. And so therefore, actually remind me somebody, well, I'll probably remind myself because I always look at the end of the recording. We will start next week with the children of David as discussed. Before we go on to the second battle with the Philistines, we'll go back and look at the names of the children who were born to David as described in verses 13 to 16, and we will compare them with Divrei Hayamim, the words, the description of who were the children of David in Divrei Hayamim. And as you will see, it's different and problematic. And the solution is, to be honest, not entirely satisfactory. But we'll do that, beginning with that next week, and we'll partially at least answer Jeffrey's question. But in so doing, we will come across some other difficulties between Shmuel Bet and Divrei Hayamim Aleph. Okay, any other questions on today's shiur? Okay, in that case, I'll wish you all a Shavua Tov.